How will you approach testing any user story in Agile project? Okay. So whether it's user story or any requirement, it doesn't matter what sort of requirement it is or user story. Okay. So usually when we say requirement in Agile project, it's user story. Okay. Now when we say how will you approach testing any user story? So the first and foremost thing is understanding that user story. How will you understand? You will read the information that is mentioned there. You will read the acceptance criteria that is mentioned in the user story. Okay. When we say acceptance criteria, it is the criteria from the end user's perspective that the customer wants this to be fulfilled as part of this particular functionality. Okay. That's the acceptance criteria. So it's kind of a, complete requirement. So understanding that, if you are not able to understand, going to the business analyst, understanding details from them. If you still have doubts, asking questions so that every detail of the user story is clear to you. Every detail of the requirement is clear to you as the tester. Okay. So that's the first sort of important thing. The second thing is define high level scenarios, what you are going to test. Now, based on that user story, you have to define, based on the acceptance criteria, what all test scenarios you are going to cover. Okay. What can you test in that particular user story? What an end user or how end user is going to interact as part of that user story. So for example, the user story is to build the same example, registration functionality. So as part of that registration functionality, what all is in scope? Okay. So for example, for this particular sprint, only UI is in scope. Okay. So registration functionality, UI build is in scope. So in the UI build, the acceptance criteria is it should have first name, last name, date of birth, and address field, and first name should have this validation, right? Only alphabets are allowed there. Last name, only alphabet should be accepted, right? So based on that, you will say, I'll write high level one-liners, what I'm going to test for each of these fields, right? So that's defining those high level scenarios. Then elaborating those into steps, which is test cases. Okay. Then I'll go ahead and elaborate those into test cases to make sure that I understand how I am going to test, right? So for first name, last name field, what all steps I'm going to follow to test, right? So that's elaborating those scenarios into the test cases and ensuring that it's there into the test management tool. Now in Agile, many people think that there is, no documentation. That's not true. Do the documentation, whatever is required. In case your project requires detailed documented test cases, you have to have those. Okay. In case that is not required and you are just fine with, one-liners or just very minimal 2-3 liners, that's okay as well. It depends on what sort of complexity, regulatory requirement project you are working in, right? If you are in bank, you will definitely have detailed test cases that need to be written because of the regulatory requirement. In telecom, regulatory requirement. In hospitals, regulatory requirement, right? So there are certain industries wherein you have, it doesn't matter you are following Agile, you will have to document the scenarios and test cases in very well formatted manner because of the requirement. Then in some other projects which don't have that much regulatory requirement, you might come up with the less documentation, right? So these are 3 key points that you can basically mention how you are going to approach testing for any requirement or user story in Agile project, right? Understanding, that is important. If you're not able to understand, collaborate with the team, understand the details, then define high level scenarios and then elaborate those into the steps how you are going to test.